A hypothesis test is a lot like a jury trial. So in the United States, someone is innocent until proven guilty. So it's the prosecutor's job to provide enough evidence that that scale of justice tips from not guilty to we've gone beyond a reasonable doubt to it looks like you are guilty of committing this crime. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. So suppose Barrett and Jordan have been accused of stealing the Mad Jack statue off the Taylor lawn. Sorry, Barrett and Jordan, I know you didn't do it, but you're handy for the example. So thanks for participating. And suppose as part of the trial, your defense team presents pictures, video evidence of you being in Zoom classes from your home. You are video chatting with family and friends, clearly in your home, in each of your respective homes, right? So we know that you're not here in Gunnison. You were nowhere near the Mad Jack statue when it was taken. So if I was on the jury, I would be voting not guilty. Okay. Suppose instead, though, that the prosecutor presents evidence. We have photographic evidence that your truck, one of your trucks, was in the Taylor Hall parking lot at the time that the Mad Jack statue went missing. We have witnesses that say that heard you joking around that you were going to steal the statue, maybe some bragging about it later on. And then, sad but true, we have some photos of Mad Jack in one of your dorm rooms. Okay. Now, if I was in the jury, I think the scale of evidence has tipped to where I would be voting guilty. Okay. So the way that a jury trial works, the way a hypothesis test works, is that we assume the null is true. So the null hypothesis is true. And then we look at the data we've collected. Is that data surprising if the null hypothesis is really true? So if you are really innocent, not guilty, and is it surprising that we would have this picture of Mad Jack in your dorm room? And yeah, that would be really surprising that we'd have a picture of Mad Jack in your dorm room if you were really innocent. Okay, unless of course Wyatt or the other Jordan is framing you for said stealing of Mad Jack. I don't know. Maybe. Okay, so that's what a p-value is. We're looking at whether the null, if the null hypothesis is true, how surprising is this data that we got? How shocking is it given that the null is supposed to be true? Okay, so let's take a look at what this definition of a p-value is, because this is going to determine whether we're going to reject the null hypothesis, meaning that we think the alternative is the likely scenario, or whether we don't have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. In other words, we would need to vote not guilty. Okay, so here's the formal definition of the p-value. The p-value is the probability that we would get the value that we got, so that we would get the sample mean we got, or one more extreme, given the null hypothesis is true. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. And I want to talk about what this more extreme means. Okay, so if we go back to this light bulb example, so the null was 700. So suppose I took a sample and my X bar, my sample mean was 837 hours. So the p-value is the probability that I would have gotten a sample mean of 837 or greater. So 840, 850, 900, anything out here in the tail. So this is the probability that I would have gotten 837 or greater, given that the null, that the actual light bulb span is really 700 hours. Okay, so that more extreme is further out here in the tails. And if I look at that less than example, that more extreme, so suppose my sample mean was 492. So it lasted 492 hours on average. So that p-value is the probability that it would last 492 hours or less, given that the actual average of the light bulb lifespan is 700 hours. Okay, so in this case, the more extreme actually means a smaller value. So the more extreme always just means further out in the tails. And remember, as we get further out in the tails, that probability gets smaller and smaller. Okay, So when that probability is really, really small, that's when we reject the null hypothesis. Okay, so in other words, the defendant is guilty. Okay, our conclusions from a hypothesis test are either that we reject the null, guilty, or we do not reject the null, not guilty. Okay, so we never accept the null. That is never a thing we do. That's never a conclusion you're allowed to state. We never accept the null. We never declare somebody innocent in court. Okay, it's either we reject the null or we do not reject the null. You're either guilty or not guilty. Okay, and we reject the null hypothesis when our p-value, our probability, is very, 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 very small. Okay, and we're going to talk about what very small means in the next video.